My name is Paula Sabloff. We are here October 16th, 2021, in my house and Jerry's house in Santa Fe, New Mexico. To start off with, I guess I should tell a little bit about my background. I was raised in New York and Boston in a home that focused on art history, and politics. I never saw a National Geographic. I never heard of National Geographic. I never heard the word anthropology until I went to college. Freshman year in college, I tried my older sister's major, which was sociology, and I hated it. Second semester, I tried anthropology, and I fell in love. Basically, anthropology was a religion substitute. It was secular humanism, and evolution was fascinating, and I became an anthropology major. And my professor at Vassar College sent me to the Peabody Museum at Harvard for a summer job. I was living outside of Boston at the time, and I worked in the library and also for a professor named Douglas Brown, Dr. Brown, who was doing publications at the time, and I helped him with those publications. As I was in the museum, during my lunch break or something, I would walk around, and I fell in love with the Coquelet gold on the third floor of the Peabody Museum. So I wrote my senior thesis on a comparative analysis of 3 different Mayan sites. This work was suggested to me by Gordon Willey, who was the main Mayan professor at Harvard at the time. And he did it actually in order to sort of play a joke on Tanya Proskuryakov. He wanted to challenge her through my work. Well, I did the work. I loved it. I must confess I had illusions of grandeur as I was writing the thing, that I would change the field and make important discoveries for people. And so I was really taken by it, and I decided to go to graduate school in Mayan archaeology. I applied to the University of Pennsylvania at the suggestion of Jerry Sabloff, who was my boyfriend at the time. And I got into Penn and decided to go there. I should add, because this is a theme that is going to come up, that when I took my senior thesis to Gordon to take a look at, I left it with him, and I came back 2 months later, and he sat me down and he pointed out every single typographical error I made and said absolutely nothing about the ideas in the senior thesis. I then went to visit my boyfriend in his lab next door, who was Jerry, and Jerry said that he and Gordon had spent 2.5 hours discussing the ideas in my thesis. So this is a theme that's going to keep coming up here. So I went to Penn, actually at Jerry's suggestion. He had done his undergraduate work there. And I went to work with Bill Coe and Linton Satterthwaite. Well, Penn had a program where all the grad students do the same work the first year. And so I had no opportunity to do archaeology except for the basic course. I would go and talk with Bill Coe once in a while, and he was obtuse. Basically, this man, anytime I sat down and talked to him about ideas that I had, and then I would turn to him and say, "Does that make sense to you? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?" He would say no. At the time, who else was there? Other students were there. Denny Puliston was his major student there. They were doing the Tikal project. And Denny was married to Olga at the time, and they took me in because they knew I was Jerry's girlfriend and interested in Mayan archaeology. And they would tell me stories about Bill Coe. And this man just sounded incredibly crazy, is the only way to put it. Okay, so he's dead. I can say these things, and you don't have to edit it out. So in my first year at Penn, we decided to get married, Jerry and I. And so I did 1 year at Penn. At that time, I applied to Harvard to continue in their program. And I was accepted into the Harvard program, into the Peabody Museum part, not the social anthropology part. And I went home to Massachusetts and visited Gordon at the time, and he said to me that he does not train women students. Now, looking back, one would think, well, why do they keep accepting women into the program if they're not going to train them? But that was what was going on at the time. Meanwhile, I took a course second semester at Penn from this most incredible woman named Olga Linares. And she had been a student at Harvard, where she was a New World anthropologist. She supposedly taught Gordon's course better than Gordon in Mesoamerican archaeology, and she supposedly taught Vote's course, Evan Vote, in Mesoamerican ethnography better than both of them. She was the most incredible teacher I had ever met, and I was very inspired by her. So once Gordon told me that he would not train me, and Olga was so inspiring, I thought, okay, I will move over into social anthropology. And that's what I did. We got married in May of 1968, and Jerry was finishing his doctoral dissertation at the time. So then he was going to go on the job market, and I thought it would be silly for me to go to 3 graduate schools. So I held off going back to graduate school, and I worked for a year. And then he ended up staying at Harvard anyway. So I decided not to continue at Harvard for various reasons. At the time, Harvard had a 1-year course in statistics that everyone had to take. And I had been a math dropout and was scared to death of a 1-year course in statistics. This was before computers, okay? So you had to do it all by hand. I had done a course in college on statistics, and it was my only C because I couldn't do the arithmetic. I added the columns up wrong. If you're adding up 40 numbers, and one of them in one addition is wrong, that's it, you're out. So I decided instead, I applied to Brandeis and went to Brandeis in cultural anthropology. And that's where I got my degree. Before I graduated, my professor was Robert Hunt at Penn, at Brandeis. My professor was Robert Hunt at Brandeis. And he took all of us first-year students into the field to Tehuacan, Mexico, to do our first field work and learn how to do field work. I lived in a little village. I managed all of that. It was fine. I liked the people. I was a little embarrassed about doing the work. At the end of the field season, I literally left my typewriter with the family I was living with, which shows you that I didn't think this was the work for me. I went back home. I wrote up my master's thesis. I presented my master's thesis, and all the professors said, this is the best master's thesis they've ever written. So I thought, okay, I better stay in this. So I didn't know what else to do with myself, is basically what was going on. So I did my doctoral dissertation on Cozumel Island, where Jerry did his first field work after his PhD. And I'm going through those notes now in order to write genealogies and family histories. I was most comfortable playing the role of granddaughter, listening to the old people's stories, because the grandchildren didn't want to do that anymore. They were doing rock and roll and off, with their radios and their friends. And I wanted to do a dissertation topic that related to the archaeologists on spatial relations. Central place theory was the big deal in those days, and I wanted to do a very interesting dissertation on central place theory and Cozumel Island. But my professor said, this is geography, you can't do this. 5 years later, 10 years later, I went back and read the dissertation and I cried, because what I tried to do was write the dissertation they wanted and sneak in the dissertation I wanted, and it was pretty much a hodgepodge. Anyway, I went to defend my thesis, and there was an archaeologist whom probably no one knows anymore. I forgot his name, David something or other. And I thought he would support me. And instead, we sat down in the room, and the first question he asks was, what do you think is wrong with your dissertation? And I thought to myself, I'm not going to crucify myself for these sons of bitches anymore. And so I turned to him and I said, I thought it was fine, or I would not have submitted it. And we went on from there. But when I left, my professor wanted to hug me goodbye, and I just walked away from him because I didn't want him to see me crying. I don't know if that's such a different story from other people's, but it's mine. What happened next? What happened next is we had moved to Salt Lake City. I finished my dissertation actually in Salt Lake City. I had my first child in just before we moved to Salt Lake City. And I didn't know what to do with myself. At that point, Pat Harpending from University of New Mexico called Jerry and said, there's a job opening here. And we were interested because Salt Lake City was not panning out. He'll tell you why we ended up in Salt Lake City. Well, in case he doesn't, basically, we moved to Salt Lake City because Jess Jennings was scheduled to retire, and they wanted a replacement for Jess. And Jess thought Jerry would be a good replacement for him, okay? We got there and learned that Jess was not going to retire. So it was a pretty bad situation for Jerry, and I had just finished the dissertation. So Pat Draper calls and says, there's a position here at UNM. Why don't you apply for it, Jerry? And he said, sounds cool. And he did. And she said to me, Paul, because we knew each other from grad school, she was a classmate of Jerry's at Harvard. She said to me, Paula, why don't you apply as well? But Brandeis gave me no training in teaching, okay? They only let teachers teach, professors teach in those days. I had no experience. I had never organized a class. I had never stood up in front of a bunch of students. I knew nothing, and I had no ego left whatsoever. And so I said no, and I just didn't know what I was going to do. So we moved to Albuquerque in 1978, and I had my second child there. I didn't know what I was going to do. I ended up editing for UNM Press for a while. At the time, the head of that unit was Beth Haddis, and she gave me the archaeology manuscripts to work on. And so I did a lot of the manuscripts from School for Advanced Research, which was still School for American Research then. I edited them. Also, Steve LeBlanc came to me and said, Paula, I want you to edit the Galaz manuscript. And I agreed because I had been editing, and I thought, okay, this is good for my skill set and for what I'm interested in. I should add that I edited everything Jerry wrote and rewrote the book that he and Gordon Willey wrote on the history of American archaeology. Until about 1986, Jerry came home. Lou Binford had organized his bio, his curriculum vitae, as I wrote number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. So Jerry did the same thing, and he came home and he said to me, Paula, look, I've written 100 things. And I said, fine, Jerry, you're on your own. Steve said to me, okay, Paula, and I want you to edit this manuscript on a computer. I said, what? He said, go buy a K-Pro. So I went out and I bought a K-Pro. And he taught me how to use it. And I sat there and I said, as my intellectual self, I said, well, why does this work? And why does that work? And he said, shut up and just do it. And he was right. It was the best way to learn. And I've been on one since 1982. So I edited the Galaz, and believe it or not, the Galaz manuscript, I am still getting hits on it through academia and ResearchGate. People are still crediting me with being the editor of the Galaz manuscript. So I did that, and then I went, and then, where were we? I edited for a while, and then I made one snide comment to Beth about a manuscript, an archaeology manuscript, and she fired me. So I had hoped to get in there full time and edit for the rest of my life, and instead she got me fired. I didn't know what I was going to do with myself, but at that point, Fred Harris came along. Senator Fred Harris, who ran for president of the United States. He was from Oklahoma. He ran for president to the United States. He lost in the New Hampshire elections to Jimmy Carter, okay? And he then moved to New Mexico and started teaching government at UNM, at University of New Mexico. And he was married at the time to LaDonna Harris, and we were all so excited there was going to be an Indian in the White House, his wife, but it didn't happen. Anyway, Fred met me at a party and met Jerry at this party, and we were talking about the computer and stuff. And this was 1983. In 1983, the President of the United States was Ronald Reagan, and everyone was very upset about education at the time. And he had a commission look at education in the United States, and they wrote a paper called A Nation at Risk. And once that came out, every governor in America appointed a commission for higher education and a commission for K through 12. And Fred headed the commission for higher education. And he invited me to come along and be the administrator of it. I got him to name me executive director. He wanted to name me secretary because that's what he said they did in Congress. I said, there is no way I will accept the name of secretary. I will accept the title of secretary. But executive director was okay. He said, okay, you can be the executive director. We did that for 6 months. It was absolutely fascinating. We held hearings all over New Mexico. So I got to see all the campuses in New Mexico. And I got to see a wonderful thing, which at the time was called Albuquerque TVI, which was the Technical Vocational Institute. It has a different name now, but I don't know what it was. And I thought, boy, that's the best way to teach. I don't know if you can leave this in or not, but I really was enamored of it. So when that finished, I then went to work up in Santa Fe for the, it was called the BEF, the Bureau of Education Finance. It's now the Department of Higher Education. And I did that for 6 months doing strategic planning. And that's where I learned how to do strategic planning. And it was a lot of fun, and it was a good thing to do. And after that, we went to England on Jerry's sabbatical in 1984, 1985. And during that year, I decided that I would do research on higher education because, frankly, I hated Mexico. I hated being an American Jewish woman in Mexico and trying to learn about people's politics. What I learned is that people will tell you all about their money, people will tell you all about their sex life, but they won't tell you how they do politics. And that's what I was interested in. So I didn't want to go back to Mexico, was the bottom line, even though Jerry was going to continue to dig there. So I thought higher education was a good research topic for me, and I started doing that in Cambridge, England. I was in Cambridge. Colin Renfrew set me up in the Latin American Center there, and I was supposed to turn my dissertation into a book. And after I read it and cried, I thought, I have no interest in this whatsoever. I don't want to go back. So so I turned toward research in higher education, and I started doing that, which was fine. We came back to Albuquerque for a year, at which time we decided to leave. What happened basically was all of our friends had left. My best friend had left, and our 12-year-old came home from Jefferson Middle School, and the head of the English department had written on his paper, "Josh, you write real good." And I turned to my husband and I said, "Jerry, we're moving. We're going back east so that our children have a decent education." And so he applied to different places and was on the short list for provost at the University of Pittsburgh. They decided to give the provostship to somebody else, but since the entire faculty had preferred Jerry to the other fellow, they decided to offer Jerry a professorship there. So we moved to Pittsburgh, and I became the head of strategic planning in the office of the vice president for administration. Well, that was a total nightmare. This guy was crazy, the people were mean. I will tell you another funny story. The first day I walked into my job there, it was in a building literally called the Cathedral of Learning. It was a 40-story high building, and the bottom floor was built like a cathedral, a Gothic cathedral. But instead of the pews, there were elevator shafts. And I walked into this building and I said to myself, can a nice Jewish girl be happy working in a cathedral? And by the end of the first week, the answer was no. So I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. We owned a house in Albuquerque, which had not sold. We owned a house in Pittsburgh because we had 2 children to settle. And there was no way we could do without my salary. So I worked there for a while and then the administrator put me into strategic planning, which I thought was going to be great. But the provost in charge of it left. And so they stopped doing strategic planning. And my boss said, Paula, it's time to leave. Well, I finally found a job in the School of Education administering another program. And all I can say is, before that, I sort of thought, boy, it would be nice not to work. And how do you get out of working? And when I went to this place, I thought, boy, I sort of wish I wouldn't be hit by a car, but by a bus, so that I wouldn't have to work. I mean, it was that bad. And finally, I left that by Jerry becoming chairman of the anthropology department at Pitt. And the trade-off was he got me a lectureship at Pitt. And so at 40-something years of age, I finally taught my first class. And the irony is, I loved it. I loved those students. I loved mentoring. Those students were wonderful people. They were excited by what I had to teach. They asked me to teach different classes. They wrote me thank you letters at the end of the semester. It was a really good experience. But what happened? I started teaching research methods, which was wonderful. And because I started teaching research methods, I applied to an NSF summer school in 1991, which was run by Russ Bernard and Purdy Pelto, who was at University of Connecticut, and Russ was at University of Florida in Gainesville. And it was to teach, I thought it was to train me to teach research methods, but it was really to train me to do computerized anthropology, cognitive anthropology. And finally, I felt comfortable in anthropology, in social anthropology, because I went into cognitive anthropology. After a while, we learned that the director of the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology was stepping down, and they asked Jerry to apply for that job. So I then decided to stay in Pittsburgh for another 2 years. In that way, our daughter could graduate from high school, which she very much wanted to do. And our son was already in college. And I had the opportunity to be a real assistant professor at a branch campus of Pitt. And I wanted to know what it felt like to be real instead of a lecturer. So I took that job, and I really appreciated it. I liked that job too. The provost there thought I was absolutely shockingly amazing, because the faculty would sit at lunch and I made them talk about politics and ideas instead of about their wives and their children. But I was teaching 4 courses a semester, which was no joke. I would come home hoarse at the end of each day. So anyway, our daughter graduated and I moved to Penn. And at Penn, I again had a very weird position. Again, they didn't know what to do with me. They would not accept the fact that I was an assistant professor at this branch campus. And they wanted to make me a lecturer. But a lecturer had 6 years and then they kicked you out. And I was scared of not being able to get into a full-time position, get into a regular position. You have to understand that by now, I was in my 50s. I had never applied for a job on my own, okay? I had never gone through that process. And I was scared that I wouldn't make it. So at Penn, they put me as a curator in the museum, reporting to Greg Posel, who was a Near Eastern archaeologist. He worked in the Indus Valley and Harappa. And then I was an adjunct assistant professor in the anthropology department, where I taught 2 courses. And I'll be honest, I knew nothing about museum work. I cheated. I spent most of my time doing my classes, working on my classes, because that's what I loved. But just before we left Pittsburgh, just before I left Pittsburgh, I got into researching in Mongolia. And that's another hairy dog story. So Seth Spalding, the professor in the education school, had experience in Mongolia and was asked by the new Mongolian government to come in and redo their education system. After all, if you go from teaching kids how to be a good communist to how to be good capitalists and democracy voting people, you need to totally change the education system. So Seth pulled me into that, or rather I worked my way into that. And in 1994, I got to help him with Mongolian administrators who came to Pittsburgh to visit. My reward for helping him was to go to Mongolia for 3 weeks with the higher education group and see what life was like there. Well, what I was doing was scouting it out to see if I could do research there as an anthropologist. And so I fell in love before that plane landed. The rolling hills are gorgeous, the scenery is beautiful, and the people were people I liked. They were people who told you what they thought, told you how they felt. And I just was happier with people who were honest that way, than with people who hid things or had to tell you things, not what they felt, but what they thought you wanted to hear. So in 1996, I got a small grant, and I spent 6 weeks in Mongolia doing some research there. The same program I had done on higher education in Pennsylvania, I did in Mongolia, which was basically studying the relationship between the higher education institutions and the government as a patron-client relationship, and how the client, the institutions, worked the patrons, got them to do what they wanted. So I did that, and when I was there, this vice rector, I guess we would call him a provost, said to me, "Paula, it would be really fascinating if an American came and studied what's going on in terms of democracy here." I thought, that's cool. So I went home and wrote an NSF grant and went back to Mongolia in 1998 to research Mongolians' ideas on democracy. So it was totally cognitive anthropology, which I preferred. It was a topic that I liked. And I worked there. I did the project. I ran into, what was his name? John Olson. Olson, thank you. I ran into John Olson there, and I told him what I was doing because I had 2 research sites. I had 7 people working in one site, gathering information, and I had 6 people gathering information in the other site. And John Olson looks at me and says, "Paula, you're not an anthropologist, you're an archaeology director." So I thought, that's cool too, which was fine. So I did that project, and that's the one I wrote my book off of and worked on and got a lot of pleasure from. What happened at Penn in 2008 was Jerry and I were in a taxi cab at the American Anthropological Association meetings when I got a phone call. And it was the new director of the museum. Jerry had stopped being director by then. He was the new director of the museum, a guy named Hodges, Richard Hodges, who said, "Paula, we're closing down everybody with your category, with your position. But you have 6 months to find another job and to stay here." And I said to him, "You've got to be kidding. After what I've done for this place, after what my husband has done for this place, you have to understand that I was fundraising along with him all the way. I was at every goddamn cocktail party there was, wearing high heels on stone floors. My back was a wreck, and my work was postponed because of all of this stuff. So he said, yes, you're out. I got back to Penn, and basically he had taken all 18 of us off the list, off the email list. It was like we were ghosts for 6 months. We were, and some of them worked their way back in. Some of them, like Naomi Miller. Some of them they fired outright. Some of them they put on weird things. So I tried to get another job at Penn, but for various reasons it didn't happen. And so Jerry went on the job market. And Jerry was offered the job of president of the Santa Fe Institute. And since we always loved New Mexico and thought of it as our second home, we thought, okay, we can move here. So they invited me to come and do my research here. And that's what we did. We literally, we had less than a month to move here. We put our daughter in our house to take care of our house because she was living in Philadelphia at the time. We put our computers and our summer clothes in the car, and we drove across country and started work here. They said to me that I could have the provost here said to me I could have 3 months as a research fellow, and then they would decide what to do. Well, I went to him after 2.5 to 3 months, and I said, I've given a talk. I've shown that I can speak your language and I can do things, and I would like to become a professor like everybody else. And he said, well, no, we'll give you a year. And I looked at him and I said to myself, I'm 64 years old. I don't have another year of this crap. And so they got another fellow and another administrator to take me to lunch. This keeps happening to me. People take me to lunch where I can't leave because I don't have a car, and they tell me what I have to do. I was mad as hell, I must confess. And I said to this other administrator, I said, if you do not make me a professor like everyone else, since I am doing the same work, then I will not be fundraising with my husband. A board meeting is coming up, and the board will know why I will not be fundraising with my husband. So they made me a professor. But to have to fight for this is just, to put up with this is just amazing. So I stayed as a professor there from 2009 to 2015. During that time, I finished my Mongolia work, and Jerry got a grant from the Templeton Foundation, a $3 million grant to study complexity. And there were 3 units. There was the archaeology unit, the biological unit, and the physics unit, this beginning of life kind of thing. And I thought, all my life I have been an outsider. I have been alone. I have done my work alone. I have not had a real appointment. Nobody ever talked to me because since I wasn't a real faculty member and I didn't have a vote, why would they bother? So I thought, I'm going to go back and do an archaeology project, given his grant. And that's what I did. I started to study one thing and moved into another. I started to what I wanted to know was, why did New World societies develop complexity later than Old World societies? Do you need a certain amount of millennia to build up knowledge in order to develop complex society? And was it the same amount of time in the Old World as the New World? So I started researching this, doing comparative analysis of multiple societies. This young fellow who was at Santa Fe Prep came to work with me. His name is Rob Weiner. He's now finishing his doctoral degree at Colorado under Scott Ortman. And Rob and I together developed 295 criteria for society, taking it from everything from social organization to, sherds. I learned an awful lot. That was a lot of fun. Do you know that in China, they developed pottery before they developed agriculture? I didn't know any of that. So what we thought was the natural progression from A to B to C to D in archaeology doesn't hold all over the world. Anyway, I started working on that, and from there, we didn't finish that project, frankly. We went into complex societies just where they have written records. And for the New World, that would be the Spanish coming in. But for the Old World, I started with cuneiform. And what I wanted to do was find out, were they all the same? Did they organize their societies the same? So I went back to Ralph Linton's Status and Role, and we made charts of about 15 societies of all the statuses and all the roles attached to the statuses in those societies. From that, I took 8 societies that we had enough information for and wrote a paper about the kings and how the underlying structure is exactly the same in these 8 societies with independent invention because they were Inca, Maya, Zapotec, Aztec, Old Kingdom Egypt, Old Babylonia, Shang China, and Hawaii, proto-historic Hawaii. They had the exact same structure, they did the exact same things, and they had the exact same criteria that they had to meet as kings. This is before most of them had primogeniture. So you had to be a warrior to be a king, and you had to use your kin to form alliances. I wrote that paper in order to write the paper that I really wanted to write, which was on the political agency of royal women. And again, I took the 8 societies and wrote about the royal women. Did they have any power? Did they have any political agency or not? And that comparative paper is the one I'm getting a lot of hits on in ResearchGate and academia, though I'm getting hits on the other ones as well. I'm very proud of that work. I feel I've come full circle, and one would like to say all's well that ends well, but it was tough. What can I say? This past summer, I wrote to David Friedel and told him about these papers, and would he like me to say a few words about them to the Maya group that he was organizing. And I did that, and they seemed to like it a lot, and now I have to write the chapter in the book that they're going to do. So I am back to archaeology on one hand. On the other hand, I've gone back to my Cosimo notes from 1972, 1973, which were never published, and I'm recreating the genealogies and family histories in order to give back to those families, which I never did anything. I just walked away. And so I'm hoping to contact them now. And I've got 3 almost done, and I'm trying to do that. Things I'm proud of that I did. I'm proud of the exhibit that I did. When I was at Pitt and went to Mongolia and learned that I was going to be in a museum, I went to their Museum of National History, and together we developed an exhibit on modern Mongolia, which was, we developed an exhibit on the changes in Mongolia from the feudal period in early 1900s to the communist socialist period in the middle years to democracy and what that means to citizens, to people living there. My underlying goal, of course, was to tell Americans that the kind of government you live under affects your life directly. That exhibit went to the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian, and was on the mall for 5 months, which over 5 million people had the ability to see it. And it was at Penn first, of course, and then it went to Middlebury College because of a professor there. I wrote a book on that, which I'm also very proud of. And I'm proud of the book I wrote, Does Everybody Want Democracy? Insights from Mongolia, which was about my cognitive work in Mongolia. But what I really feel good about is that paper on the political agency of women. And so, what can I say? I'm also proud that I've stayed married for 53 years and had 2 incredible children.